The date is July 27, 1962. The location is the Murmansk Oblast, the frozen, jagged northern edge of the Soviet Union. Outside, the temperature is 30 degrees below zero. Inside the reinforced concrete bunker of the PVO Strany, the Soviet Air Defense Forces, the air is thick with the smell of stale tobacco and ozone. This is the most heavily guarded airspace on the planet. It is the gateway to the shipyards of Severodvinsk and the nuclear submarine pens of the Northern Fleet. Nothing moves here without the Kremlin knowing about it. But at 0900 hours, the impossible happens. A junior radar operator, staring at the circular sweep of a P-14 Tall King radar, sees a blip materialize on the outer edge of the scope. It is faint, almost ghostly, dancing on the periphery of detection. He blinks, assuming it is a ghost return, a cloud of ice crystals or an atmospheric anomaly common in the high latitudes. He wipes the glass screen with his sleeve. The blip does not disappear. It solidifies, and it is moving. The operator grabs his caliper to measure the distance traveled between sweeps. He pauses. He measures again. His hands begin to tremble. He calls over the shift commander. The senior officer, a hardened veteran of the Great Patriotic War, leans over the scope, cigarette dangling from his lip. He looks at the timestamps. He looks at the distance. He looks at the operator. "Equipment malfunction," the commander barks. "Recalibrate. That speed is not possible." According to the physics of 1962, an aircraft cannot move that fast. The radar suggests the target is traveling at over 3,000 kilometers per hour. That is Mach 3, 3 times the speed of sound. At that speed, friction should melt the aluminum skin of any known aircraft. Furthermore, the altitude reading is flickering at 26,000 meters, over 85,000 feet. At that height, the air is so thin that jet engines should flame out. A U-2 spy plane can fly that high, but it crawls across the sky like a glider. This object is moving faster than a rifle bullet. The commander orders a diagnostic check. The equipment is functioning perfectly, the ghost is real, and it is heading straight for the ballistic missile silos near Plesetsk. The bunker erupts into chaos. The alarm klaxons harsh, mechanical screams tear through the silence. This is not a drill. This is an intrusion by an unidentified vehicle that defies the laws of aerodynamics, as the Soviets understand them. The order goes out to the scramble huts. Take off immediately, intercept and destroy. On the tarmac, pilots of the elite guard regiment sprint to their MiG-21 aircraft. These are the pride of the Soviet Air Force, the fastest interceptors in their arsenal, capable of reaching Mach 2. The afterburners ignite, blue flames spitting onto the frosted concrete, and the jets roar into the grey sky. This is where the nightmare begins for the pilots. As the MiG-21 aircraft claw for altitude, straining their engines to the breaking point, the ground controllers scream vectors into their headsets. Target is 12 o'clock high, range 40 kilometers, speed increasing. The lead Soviet pilot looks up. He sees nothing but the dark purple bruise of the stratosphere. He pushes his throttle past the detent, the engine temperature gauge redlining. The MiG shudders violently as it pushes through the sound barrier. He is at his absolute limit. "I have no visual," the pilot shouts over the radio static. "Repeat altitude." "Target altitude 26,000 meters," the controller replies, his voice cracking with disbelief. The pilot looks at his altimeter. He is at 18,000 meters. His aircraft is wallowing in the thin air, struggling to generate lift. He pulls the stick back, trying to snap the nose up for a missile lock. For a split second he sees it. High above him, a silver needle flashes in the sunlight. It is not maneuvering, it is not evading. It is simply existing in a realm of the sky that belongs to astronauts, not pilots. It looks serene, untouched by the violence of the atmosphere below. The Soviet pilot arms his K-13 air-to-air missiles. He waits for the growl of the seek ahead. But the geometry is wrong. The target is moving so fast that by the time the radar paints it, the object is already kilometers away from where it should be. The firing solution computer cannot calculate a lead point. The math fails. "Fire! Fire!" the ground controller screams. The pilot squeezes the trigger in desperation. The missile leaps off the rail, trailing white smoke. It climbs, seeking the heat of the intruder. But the silver needle simply accelerates. It doesn't turn. It doesn't dive. It just pushes the throttle forward. The Soviet pilot watches, helpless, as the intruder pulls away with contemptuous ease. It leaves the missile behind as if the weapon was standing still. The intruder is not escaping, it is dismissing them. Then, the pilot's own warning lights flash red. His engine has flamed out from oxygen starvation. He falls from the sky, his jet tumbling like a leaf, while the ghost vanishes off the northern horizon, untouched. Back in the bunker, the radar screen is empty. The room is silent. The commander stares at the fading phosphorescence where the blip used to be. He picks up the secure red phone that connects directly to Moscow. His hand is shaking. How does he report this? How does he tell the general staff that an enemy aircraft just flew over their most sensitive nuclear sites, and their best interceptors looked like children throwing rocks at a shooting star? If you enjoy deep dives into the hidden history of military aviation and the secrets of the Cold War, make sure you are subscribed to Cold War Impact. We are declassifying history one story at a time. Click the subscribe button now, so you do not miss the truth behind the legends. The immediate aftermath of the incident is not anger, it is fear. Cold, paralyzing fear. In the Kremlin, the report lands on the desk of the defense minister. The implications are terrifying. The Soviet military doctrine relies on a simple promise to its people and its leadership. The motherland is impenetrable. The Iron Curtain is not just a metaphor, it is a wall of surface-to-air missiles, radar, and interceptor aircraft designed to smash any Western bomber that tries to cross the border. For a decade, they believed they had solved the problem. They had shot down Francis Gary Powers in his U-2 in 1960. They had proven that altitude was no longer a defense. They had forced the Americans to stop overflights. They had won the battle for the sky. Or so they thought. Now, a single event has shattered that illusion. This new intruder, this Object 88, as it is tentatively labeled in the initial confidential files, changes everything. If the Americans have a plane that can fly at Mach 3 at 85,000 meters, the entire Soviet air defense network is obsolete. Billions of rubles, thousands of radar stations, regiments of missiles, all of it is instantly junk. The stakes are existential. If this aircraft is a bomber, it could deliver a nuclear payload to Moscow before the air raid sirens even start winding up. There would be no warning. No time to get the leadership to the bunkers. No time to launch a retaliatory strike. The concept of mutually assured destruction relies on the ability to detect and intercept an attack. This ghost removes that ability. Intelligence officers from the GRU and technical experts from the Mikoyan and Sukhoi design bureaus are summoned in the middle of the night. They are flown to the radar sites to interview the operators. They listen to the tapes of the pilots' panicked breathing. They analyze the radar plots. The scientists argue. Some claim it was a ballistic missile test gone wrong. Others suggest it was a meteor. A few, speaking in hushed tones, suggest it might be technology not of this earth. But the radar data is stubborn. The object turned. Meteors do not turn. Missiles follow ballistic arcs. They do not cruise level for hundreds of kilometers. This was a machine built by human hands. The question burning through the halls of the Kremlin is not just, what is it? The question is, how long have they been watching us? The paranoia sets in deep. Every radar glitch, every atmospheric anomaly is now treated as a potential penetration. The entire Soviet air defense force is placed on high alert. Pilots sleep in their cockpits. Radar operators are punished for blinking. They are chasing shadows, terrified that the silver needle will return. But the most disturbing part for the Soviet leadership is the silence. The Americans say nothing. There are no press releases from Washington boasting of a new superplane. There are no parades. The Western press is silent. This silence is worse than a threat. It implies that this technology is so secret, so advanced, that the Americans don't even need to brag about it. It implies that the Soviet Union is fighting a war against an enemy they cannot see, cannot catch, and cannot understand. The frantic hunt for answers begins. The Soviet Union mobilizes its entire intelligence apparatus, thousands of spies, diplomats, and scientists, to solve the riddle of the ghost in the northern sky. They need to know what it is, and more importantly, they need to know how to kill it. But as they scour the world for clues, they are looking in the wrong places. They are looking for a plane. They are looking for an evolution of what they already know. They do not realize that in a remote desert halfway across the world, a group of engineers has not just built a new plane, they have reinvented the very concept of flight. The Soviets prepare for a conventional investigation, but they are about to fall down a rabbit hole of deception, false leads, and technological envy that will consume their military budget for the next 20 years. The ghost is back, And this time, it is not going away. The panic inside the Kremlin does not manifest as screaming, it manifests as a suffocating pressure. By the winter of 1963, the reports from the border radar stations have accumulated into a stack of files thick enough to ruin careers. The ghost is no longer an isolated anomaly. It is a recurring nightmare. General secretaries demand answers. The Minister of Defense demands heads on platters. But the men responsible for the safety of the Soviet sky, the commanders of the PVO Strany, have nothing to offer but failures. A secret commission is formed in a nondescript building on the outskirts of Moscow. It is staffed by the best minds of the Soviet military-industrial complex. Aerodynamicists from TAGI, the Central Aero Hydrodynamic Institute, radar specialists from the Radio Engineering Institutes, and propulsion experts from the finest engine bureaus. Their mandate is simple: identify the intruder. They begin by analyzing the breadcrumbs left behind by the ghost. These are not physical pieces of wreckage, but electronic scars carved into the magnetic tapes of Soviet radar stations. The analysts project the flight paths onto massive wall maps of the Soviet Union. The lines are terrifyingly straight. The intruder does not weave through valleys to hide from radar as a tactical bomber would. It does not hug the terrain. It draws a straight line across the stratosphere, cutting across international borders with total impunity. One analyst points out the speed consistency. "Look here," he says, tracing a line that skirts the Kamchatka Peninsula. It maintains Mach 3.2 for 40 minutes. Continuous. No afterburner could sustain that fuel consumption. No engine we know of can survive that heat. This is the first major stumbling block. In the Soviet understanding of metallurgy, an engine running at that speed for that long would simply melt. The turbine blades would liquefy and exit the exhaust pipe as molten slag. The Soviets have experimented with titanium, but they find it brittle, impossible to weld, and agonizingly difficult to work with. They assume the Americans face the same limitations. Therefore, the committee initially concludes that the radar data must be flawed. Electronic countermeasures, a senior general suggests. The Americans are not flying a plane. They are projecting a false signal to test our electronic defenses. It is a ghost signal generated by a jammer on a slow-moving platform. It is a comforting theory. It means the laws of physics have not been broken. It means the motherland is not defenseless. But the pilots destroy this theory. Reports from the Far East military district begin to filter in. A MiG-21 pilot, patrolling near Vladivostok, reports a visual contact. He describes a black triangle high above him, trailing a series of shock diamonds in its exhaust plume, a phenomenon known as donuts on a rope. He sees the sunlight glinting off a canopy. "It is real, Comrade General," the pilot testifies during a debriefing, his face pale. "It is not a signal. It cast a shadow." The electronic ghost theory dies. The rocket plane theory takes its place. The Soviets suspect the Americans have operationalized the X-15, a rocket-powered aircraft dropped from a bomber. But the flight times don't match. The X-15 flies for minutes. This intruder loiters for over an hour. The investigation turns inward, becoming a hunt for scapegoats. Radar operators who lose the target are accused of negligence or drunkenness. In the frozen bunkers of Siberia, fear of the KGB becomes as potent as the fear of the American intruder. Operators stare at their scopes until their eyes bleed, terrified that if they blink, the ghost will slip past, and they will be on the next train to a labor camp. This atmosphere of terror breeds a new kind of mythology within the Soviet ranks. The intruder is given names by the terrified conscripts. They call it the Black Devil, or simply the Witch. Rumors spread in the mess halls that the plane uses alien technology recovered from crash sites. They whisper that it has no pilot, that it is a robot sent to map out the coordinates for the final nuclear war. To the Soviet military leadership, however, the leading theory becomes one of strategic bombardment. They are aware the Americans are building the XB-70 Valkyrie, a massive white six-engine bomber designed to fly at Mach 3. Soviet intelligence believes this ghost is the prototype or the vanguard of a Valkyrie fleet. This misunderstanding is catastrophic for their strategic planning. They assume the intruder is a bomber. If it is a bomber, it carries hydrogen bombs. If it flies over the Kola Peninsula, it is not taking pictures. It is practicing a decapitation strike. Desperation drives the Soviets to push their existing technology to the point of failure. They upgrade the 75 Divina surface to air missile systems. They tweak the radar tracking algorithms to handle higher speeds. They construct traps along the likely flight paths overlapping fields of fire where 3 or 4 missile batteries can launch simultaneously. In 1964, they spring one of these traps. The Ghost appears on radar, skirting the Baltic Sea. The Soviets wait. They hold their fire, letting the target drift deeper into the engagement envelope. The tracking officer watches the range counter tick down. Target in range. Launch. 3 V-750 missiles roar off their launchers, reaching speeds of Mach 3.5. They are the deadliest anti-aircraft weapons in the world. They climb rapidly, their rocket motors burning bright. The radar operator watches the blips of the missiles converge on the target. It looks like a perfect intercept. The geometry is solid. Then, the target does something simple. It accelerates. It doesn't jink. It doesn't drop chaff. It just increases its speed from Mach 3.0 to Mach 3.2. That tiny increment is enough. The missiles, maneuvering hard to catch up, bleed off their energy. They stall in the thin air, miles behind the target, and self-destruct harmlessly. The debris of the expensive Soviet missiles rains down into the sea. The Ghost flies on, its course unperturbed. The failure of the trap sends shockwaves through the Kremlin. The report that reaches Nikita Khrushchev is grim. We cannot catch it. We cannot shoot it down. It flies higher than our ceiling and faster than our missiles. The psychological impact is profound. The Soviet Union prides itself on scientific superiority. They put the first satellite in space, Sputnik. They put the first man in space, Gagarin. They believe they own the heavens. Yet here is an American machine that treats the Soviet border not as a wall, but as a line painted on a map, to be crossed at will. The investigation shifts from "what is it?" to "how do we copy it?" The KGB is ordered to steal the plans. Code names are generated. Spies in the United States are activated. They look for leaks at Boeing, at Convair, at North American Aviation. They scour trash bins and listen in on bars near aerospace plants. But they find nothing. The Americans have created a black hole of information. The project is so compartmentalized, so buried in the black budget, that even high-ranking US generals don't know it exists. The Soviets are chasing a phantom. They start analyzing the atmospheric disturbances left by the plane. They try to capture air samples from its wake to analyze the exhaust fumes for exotic fuels. They find traces of a unique hydrocarbon, something they haven't seen before. It's not standard kerosene. It's a chemical clue, but it doesn't help them build an interceptor. By the mid-1960s, the Soviet military reaches a humiliating conclusion. They are 5, perhaps 10 years behind the Americans in metallurgy and engine design. They cannot stop the intruder with what they have. They need a monster of their own. The order goes out to the Mikoyan Design Bureau. Build a Hunter. Build an aircraft that is pure speed. Strip away maneuverability. Strip away comfort. Strip away range. Build a manned missile that can catch the Ghost. This directive will give birth to the MiG-25 Foxbat, a brute-force masterpiece of stainless steel and massive engines. But even as they weld the steel for the Foxbat, the Soviet engineers are haunted by a nagging doubt. They are reacting. They are playing catch-up. And they still don't understand the true nature of the beast they are hunting. They think they are fighting a bomber that wants to kill them. They don't realize they are being watched by a camera that wants to undress them. While the Soviets are running in circles, convinced that World War III is being rehearsed in their skies, the truth is sitting under a scorching sun in the Nevada desert. The mystery is not magic. It is titanium, slide rules, and the genius of a man who barely spoke above a whisper. The investigation has failed to stop the flights. The legend has only grown. And now, the focus must shift to the source of this madness. While the Soviet Union tore itself apart hunting for ghosts in the stratosphere, the source of their terror sat dripping fuel on a runway in the high desert of Nevada. The location is Groom Lake, Area 51, a place that, on official maps in the 1960s, did not exist. It is a flat, scorched grid of dry lakebed surrounded by mountains that shield it from prying eyes. Here, under the blinding white sun, a team of men in short-sleeved shirts and thin ties are working inside a hangar that smells of exotic chemicals and burning rubber. They are not wizards. They are engineers. They are the employees of Lockheed's Advanced Development Programs, better known to history as the Skunk Works. And leading them is a man named Clarence Kelly Johnson. Johnson is not a typical corporate executive. He is a gruff, stubborn genius who runs his department like a feudal lord. He has a simple philosophy: be quick, be quiet, and be on time. The problem handed to him by the CIA in the late 1950s was considered physically impossible by the rest of the aviation world. The U-2 spy plane Johnson's previous masterpiece was too slow. The Soviets had learned to shoot it down. The United States needed a new eye in the sky. The CIA's requirements were insane. Build a plane that can fly across the Soviet Union faster than a bullet, higher than the edge of space, and be invisible to radar. Johnson looked at the physics and realized that everything they knew about aviation was useless. The enemy was not the Russians. The enemy was heat. At Mach 3, the air friction is so intense that the leading edges of the wings reach temperatures of over 800 degrees Fahrenheit. The nose cone glows red hot. At those temperatures, a standard aluminum airframe would lose its structural integrity. It would turn soft, like warm butter, and the wings would simply fold up and snap off. Steel could handle the heat, but it was too heavy. The plane would never get off the ground. There was only one metal on the periodic table that was light enough to fly and strong enough to survive the inferno: titanium. But in the 1960s, titanium was a nightmare to work with. It was brittle. It shattered if you used the wrong tools. Standard cadmium-plated wrenches caused the metal to corrode instantly. Johnson had to invent entirely new tools made of titanium just to build the plane. And there was a cruel, hilarious irony that remained one of the Cold War's greatest secrets for decades. The United States did not have enough high-grade titanium ore to build the fleet. The only country with sufficient reserves was the Soviet Union. So, the CIA set up a network of dummy corporations and shell companies in Europe. They quietly purchased tons of titanium ore from the USSR, claiming it was for pizza ovens and agricultural equipment. The Soviets happily sold the metal to the capitalists, completely unaware that they were providing the raw materials for the very machine that would humiliate their air defenses for the next 30 years. The result of this stolen metal and engineering madness is the A-12 ox cart, and its successor, the SR-71 Blackbird. To the pilots who fly it, the Blackbird does not feel like a machine. It feels like a living, breathing organism. On the ground, the plane is a mess. It leaks. Pools of JP-7 fuel, a special, low-volatility fuel developed just for this aircraft, form under the fuselage. This is intentional. The titanium panels are fitted loosely to allow for thermal expansion. If they were bolted tight on the ground, the plane would tear itself apart when it heated up at Mach 3. The Blackbird is designed to be broken on the ground and perfect in the sky. When the pilot climbs into the cockpit, he is not wearing a flight suit. He is wearing a pressure suit, identical to the ones worn by astronauts. He is effectively piloting a spaceship within the atmosphere. The launch sequence is a violent event. Two massive Pratt & Whitney J58 engines, each generating 32,000 pounds of thrust, roar to life. These are not normal jet engines. They are hybrid turbo-ramjets. They are designed to gulp air at supersonic speeds. As the Blackbird thunders down the runway and lifts off, the pilot watches the world fall away. He climbs past 30,000 feet, past 40,000. The sky turns from blue to a deep, bruised indigo. At 60,000 feet, he can see the curvature of the Earth. He pushes the throttle forward. The afterburners light up, creating a 60-foot tail of shock diamonds. The plane accelerates through the sound barrier Mach 1, Mach 2. As the speed increases, the friction builds. The plane begins to heat up. The loose panels expand and seal tight. The leaking stops. The fuselage stretches by several inches. The Blackbird settles into its element. Cruising at Mach 3.2 at 85,000 feet, the pilot is in a sanctuary of speed. He is moving faster than the rotation of the Earth at that latitude. If he flies west, he can watch the sun set in front of him, then rise again behind him. He looks at his sensors. He can see hundreds of miles in every direction. He can photograph a license plate from the edge of space. But the most satisfying instrument in the cockpit is the radar warning receiver. When he crosses into hostile airspace over Vietnam, North Korea, or near the borders of the Soviet bloc, the light on his dashboard begins to blink. The warning tone chirps in his headset. Missile launch. The pilot does not sweat. He does not bank. He does not drop flares. He remembers Kelly Johnson's simple instruction for handling threats. He simply pushes the throttle forward a fraction of an inch. The Blackbird surges. The engines gulp more air. The speed climbs to Mach 3.3, then 3.4. Far below, in the chaotic frozen world of the Soviet radar bunker, the operators watch the blip accelerate away from their fastest missiles. They scream into their radios. They pound their fists on the consoles. They are witnessing the pinnacle of Soviet military science being outrun by a plane built by a man who used a slide rule and bought his metal from their own mines. This is the American solution. It is not about overwhelming firepower. It is about overwhelming engineering. It is the physical embodiment of the philosophy that if you are fast enough, you don't have to be tough. But the Soviets, down in the snow, still don't know what it is. They see the blip, they see the speed, but they have never seen the face of the enemy. They are building myths around a machine. And in the late 1970s, the curtain is finally pulled back. The mystery is solved, not by a spy, but by a mistake. And when the Soviets finally see what has been haunting them, the shock will break their spirit. By the early 1970s, the mystery of the Silver Needle had evolved into a tangible obsession. The Soviets now had a name for their tormentor. Intelligence leaks and public statements from the United States had confirmed the existence of the program. They knew it was the SR-71, but knowing the name was not the same as understanding the reality. The Soviet military leadership had convinced themselves that the Blackbird was a fragile, experimental toy. They believed that if they could just get a heavy hitter into the sky, a boxer capable of landing one knockout punch, the American glass jaw would shatter. They built that boxer. It was the Mikoyan-Gurevich MiG-25, NATO codename Foxbat. To the outside world, the Foxbat was a monster. It was massive, clad in stainless steel, and armed with R-40 missiles the size of telephone poles. It held world speed records. It was the Soviet hammer designed to smash the American needle. On paper, it could reach Mach 3.2. On paper, it was the Blackbird killer. The shock for the Soviets did not come from a photograph. It came from the cockpit of a Foxbat, screaming over the Barents Sea. The date is shrouded in the operational logs of the PVO, but the sequence of events became legendary within the Soviet pilot corps. The radar alert sounds. The Blackbird is back. It is running a sledgehammer route, a direct run along the edge of Soviet airspace, daring them to respond. A MiG-25 pilot, the elite of the elite, is scrambled. He climbs rapidly, his afterburners dumping raw fuel into the exhaust streams. He is not afraid. He is flying the most powerful interceptor in Soviet history. He has been told by his commanders that he has the speed, he has the altitude, he has the weapon. He reaches 65,000 feet. The ground controller guides him in. Target is 40 kilometers ahead, speed Mach 3.0. You have the angle. The Soviet pilot pushes his throttle past the red line. He enters the forbidden zone of engine operation. His Tumansky engines are now consuming fuel at a rate that will empty his tanks in minutes. The turbine blades are glowing white hot. He is literally melting his own plane to catch the American. He checks his radar. The massive vacuum tube radar of the Foxbat burns through the jamming. He gets an intermittent lock. He sees the blip. Then, he looks out the canopy. And there it is. For the first time, he sees the enemy clearly. It is not a bomber. It is not a white prototype. It is a sinister matte black dart, streaking against the dark purple sky. It looks alien. It looks organic. The Soviet pilot's finger hovers over the launch button. He needs just a few more seconds to ensure the missile can make the kinematic energy calculations. He is at Mach 2.8. His aircraft is vibrating so violently the instrument panel is a blur. He is at the absolute limit of Soviet technology. He watches the Blackbird. And then, he sees the kick. The Blackbird pilot simply engages the dip in the air inlet. The SR-71 accelerates. It doesn't bank. It doesn't hide. It just walks away. The distance on the radar screen widens. 40 kilometers becomes 50. 50 becomes 60. The Soviet pilot screams in frustration. He pushes the throttle harder, but his engine temperature warning lights turn the cockpit red. If he pushes any further, his engines will explode. He has to abort. He pulls the throttle back, banking away in defeat, while the Blackbird disappears into the twilight, its exhaust plume glowing like a mockery. When the MiG-25 lands, it is a ruin. The engines are fused solid. They have to be scrapped. The aerodynamic heating has warped the steel panels. The aircraft is essentially totaled. The shock that ripples through the Soviet high command is not about the plane's existence. It is about the margin of superiority. They realize a horrifying truth. The MiG-25, their greatest engineering achievement, had to destroy itself just to see the tail of the SR-71. The American plane did that performance routinely. It did it every week. It did it without breaking a sweat. The investigation concludes with a bleak realization. The mystery was never about a secret weapon or a magic trick. It was about a fundamental gap in industrial capability. The Americans had mastered materials, science, titanium alloys, composite seals, advanced fuels that the Soviet command economy simply could not replicate. They had built a brute force counter-attractor with a rocket engine to catch a Ferrari, and it had failed. The ultimate humiliation comes when the intelligence analysts finally pieced together the Blackbird's mission profile. For years they feared it was a nuclear bomber. They terrified themselves with nightmares of atomic bombs falling from the stratosphere. But the photos and the flight paths reveal the truth. The Blackbird has no bomb bay. It has no hardpoints for missiles. It is a camera. The Soviets realize they have been bankrupting their economy, destroying their engines, and terrifying their population, all to stop a tourist. The Americans were not flying over them to destroy them. They were flying over them to watch them. This realization is more damaging than any bomb. It is a psychological checkmate. The Soviet Union is the superpower that cannot keep its curtains closed. The Americans can look in their windows whenever they want, and there is absolutely nothing the Kremlin can do about it. They keep firing missiles. Over the lifespan of the Blackbird program, the Soviets and their proxies will fire over 4,000 missiles at the SR-71. But the result is always the same. The pilots in the bunkers watch the blips merge and then watch them separate. They stop writing equipment malfunction in the logs. They start writing a new phrase, target outran intercept. The mystery is solved. The ghost is real. And it is untouchable. The Cold War was a contest of ideologies, economies, and armies. But in the high atmosphere, the contest can be reduced to a single, devastating scoreboard. Over the course of its 30-year service life, the SR-71 Blackbird flew thousands of operational sorties. It mapped the entire coastline of North Vietnam. It photographed the nuclear silos of the Kola Peninsula. It monitored the Yom Kippur War and the shipyards of North Korea. The Soviet Union and its allies fired approximately 4,000 surface-to-air missiles at the Blackbird. They scrambled hundreds of MiG-21, MiG-23 and MiG-25 aircraft to intercept it. The number of Blackbirds lost to enemy fire is exactly 0. This statistic, 4,000 to 0, is not just a victory for the United States Air Force. It is the defining metric of the technological gap that eventually broke the back of the Soviet Union. The legacy of the Ghost is not found in the wreckage of American planes, but in the bankruptcy of the Soviet state. The existence of the SR-71 forced the Kremlin to spend billions of rubles they did not have. They built massive radar networks, developed expensive new missiles like the S-300, and maintained huge fleets of fuel-guzzling interceptors, all to chase a single aircraft type that the Americans only built 32 of. It was an asymmetric cost. The United States spent millions to fly. The Soviet Union spent billions to fail. When Viktor Belenko, a Soviet pilot, defected to Japan in 1976 with his MiG-25 Foxbat, Western engineers finally got to take apart the Blackbird killer. What they found confirmed the entire narrative. They expected to find advanced composite materials and microprocessors. Instead, they found a fuselage made of hand-welded nickel-steel alloy, heavy and crude. They found avionics that used vacuum tubes instead of transistors. The MiG-25 was a magnificent achievement of brute force, a testament to what Russian engineers could do with limited resources. But it was a dinosaur trying to catch a spaceship. It proved that the Soviet system could imitate, but it could not innovate. They could see the future flying over their heads at Mach 3, but they could not reach it. The Blackbird didn't just win the air war, it helped win the Cold War by proving that the Iron Curtain was permeable. It stripped away the Soviet Union's greatest defense, its secrecy. There were no more dark corners. There were no more hidden mobilizations. The leaders in the Kremlin knew that every morning a black dart could streak overhead, and by lunchtime, the President of the United States would have high-resolution photos of their secret parking lots. In 1990, the SR-71 was officially retired, though it would be briefly reactivated later. On its final delivery flight from Los Angeles to Washington, D.C., it decided to break one last record. It flew coast to coast in 64 minutes. It crossed the entire North American continent faster than it takes to watch a movie. The sonic boom rolled across the heartland of America, a cracking whip that signaled the end of an era. Today, the surviving Blackbirds sit in museums. They are silent now. The titanium skins are cold. The puddles of fuel are gone. Children walk under the wings, looking up at the strange organic curves of the fuselage, unaware that they are standing beneath the greatest secret of the 20th century. But for the old Soviet radar operators, the men who sat in the freezing bunkers of Murmansk and Vladivostok, the memory is different. For them, the Blackbird will never be a museum piece. It will always be that terrifying, impossible green blip on the edge of the screen. The ghost that refused to be caught. The silver needle that pierced the sky and showed them that no matter how high they built their walls, they could never wall off the sky. The mystery of the 1960s was solved. It wasn't magic. It wasn't aliens. It was simply the sound of freedom, moving at 3,500 kilometers per hour.